Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Harshmeet Singh and I welcome you all to chapter number 6 of class 11th Economics NCERT. I really hope that by now you have attended all the earlier 5 classes where we have discussed a bunch of important issues about Indian economics with the idea to build a base for economics extremely sound so that it is helpful for you to understand the topics in the economics classes. Chapter number 6 that you see on the screen focuses on the idea of employment growth in India, informalization of Indian economy and the other related issues. Now, employment in simple terms is a situation where anyone who wants to work, who is trying to find a job, is able to get a job. That is employment. Opposite of it is unemployment, where you try and find a job but you're not getting a job suitable for you. Either the job you want, you're not getting it, or the job that you're getting is not up to the mark, your expectation level, not appropriate with your degree, not appropriate with the amount of money that you want to earn, so on and so forth. Countries around the world, including India, face big problems regarding unemployment. You would have seen the government, for example, starting a lot of initiatives to give employment to the people. There are some ways in which the government gives direct employment. You would have heard schemes such as MGNREGA, under which in the rural areas, the government promises 100 days of unskilled manual labor work every single day. This is an example of direct employment. A government offering a job directly, a government recruiting people directly, that is called direct employment. Similarly, the government also undertakes indirect employment programs as well, meaning the government takes certain initiatives which leads to job creations, like change in industrial policies, telling the companies you have to pay lower taxes, expecting that in turn that money will be used for expansion by the company and it will hire more people. Or the government, for example, spending a lot of money in building roads, bridges, highways. That is the government increasing its capital expenditure. All this is an example of government creating indirect jobs. It is vital for any economy to have a high labor force participation. It helps the government to get more GDP, it helps the government to get better tax collection, and it also reduces the number of people who are dependent on the government for one thing or the other. All this is extremely vital for the government, and this is what this chapter talks about. In this chapter, we will be focusing on employment structure in India, the different types of employment that we have, then the idea of labor force participation in India, how many people from the working age population are actually in the labor force, amongst that female labor force participation, what is the trend in that, is it increasing, is it decreasing. Then we'll focus on formal versus informal economies, how are they different from each other, which is the higher in India. We'll also be focusing on emerging topics such as gig economy. Where does this stand? What are the pros and cons of gig economy? Then we'll be discussing the idea of unemployment, the different types of unemployment in India. We'll also be discussing about the relationship between unemployment and economy of a country. We'll also be discussing about the issue of jobless growth. Are we really experiencing jobless growth in India? If yes, how to tackle that and what are the other issues related to it. So this is what we have in store for you for this chapter. So do stay tuned till the very end to watch this entire class. Let's start with what employment is. As I said earlier, a simple situation where if someone is looking to find a job and is successful in getting a job, that is termed as employment. It has a lot of different aspects to it. Are you getting a job that you deserve? For example, let's say I am an MBA from a top-notch institute, but the job that I get is only paying me 15,000 rupees per month. Then it's not proper employment for me. It's not helpful for me. It's not helpful for the economy. It may just be helpful for the company that has been able to hire me at such a low salary, but that is not what our economy demands. As I told you, government runs multiple schemes to lower the rate of unemployment. Higher unemployment can lead to a lot of issues in the nation. Higher unemployment can lead to lower tax collection, can lead to unrest in the society, can lead to law and order issues when people are not earning. So the governments try extremely hard to remove or at least minimize unemployment. Ideal would be 0% unemployment, but we are not living in an ideal world. But the government tries to reduce unemployment as much as possible. Now, employment, as I said, is usually divided into formal and informal, depending upon the nature of employment, depending upon what exactly are the benefits you are getting. Let's try and look into them. First, let's try and see formal part of employment, what is formal employment, and then we'll go into the idea of informal employment and see how it compares. Let's start with formal employment. Formal employment is an employment that comes with a lot of benefits. First of all, do remember, informal does not mean illegal. That is one big mistake that many people commit. If someone is involved in informal employment, that does not mean that there is anything illegal happening. Let's try and take an example. Let's say you want to open up a shop, just a normal grocery shop. You employ a couple of people with you. They help you stock up the shop, they help you sell stuff, they might even be helping you in delivering stuff to the nearby household, etc. So you employ them and you're paying them 10, 12,000 per month, whatever. You did not do any paperwork with them, you did not have any policy, you did not say that, okay, after every year I will increase your salary by 10, 15%. Nothing like that was done. You just gave them a verbal assurance that come from tomorrow, this is your salary. And they start to come from tomorrow and let's start. This is informal employment. This is not illegal. This is informal. Because there is no written agreement, there is no assurances, there is no written agreement about notice period, etc. The reason why it works is because informal employment or informal jobs or informal organizations are easier to form. You don't require any licenses from the government. You don't require any permission from the ministries. You don't have to do a lot of paperwork. You find a space, you find a buyer, you find sellers, and your job is started, your business gets started. Formal employment, on the other hand, comes with certain features. First big feature, it has social security benefits. Very, very, very important. Social security benefits such as, let's say it has, most of the companies offer health insurance to their employees. So if you fall ill, there will be a health insurance that's a part of your compensation that will be taken care of. Then there are issues or laws such as, let's say, Maternity Benefit Act. So in India, we have a Maternity Benefit Act under which if your female employee gets pregnant, she can get a paid leave of up to 26 weeks. 26 weeks of paid leave is compulsory. The government is not giving any money to the company, but the company has to give salary for half a year, that is 26 weeks, for this employee. You only get this if you are in formal employment, not in informal employment. So the corporates or even the government jobs that people are so desperate for, all that comes in the category of formal employment because you get all these social security benefits attached to that. Similarly, it has some regulatory compliance. Means, for example, if you're in formal employment, from your salary they have to deduct a tax, TDS will be deducted that they will submit to the government. They have to deduct Provident Fund, PF will be deducted. Depending on what kind of business they are in, they might have to ask for license from the government. They might have to ask, there might be some inspection also that might be done. So there's a lot of regulation that is involved, and the company has to abide by all these rules and regulations, labor code, etc. That is why many companies try to avoid going into that route. Because see, you are just putting more burden over your head by doing all of this, right? So if you are, let's say, just starting an operation on a very small scale, you would not really want to go through all of this. So people avoid this and start saying that, okay, we'll do something informally. Another very important part is the job security. In other words, it's called the notice period. So if you're in formal employment, both employee and the employer, so the company or the employee, have this kind of a restriction that if you have to leave the job or if the company has to let go of the job or ask you to let go, they have to tell you in advance. For example, 1 month or 2 months or even in 3 months in certain cases. This is called a notice period. It gives you a job security. It tells you that even if you're asked to let go, there will be a time period given to you, helping you to find a job. In this time period, you can go and find a job. You can try and see what options do you have available. Because what happens in this case is that in case the company says that no, I want you to go or leave the job immediately, then they will have to pay you a salary of 1 month or 2 months. So you have a backup available. Similarly, if you want to leave a job, you also have to give the company an advance notice period so that they can hire someone to take your position. The company business does not suffer. It happens only in formal jobs. In an informal job, the person or the company will just tell you, don't come from tomorrow, and that is done. This part of the employment also has written contracts. As I said earlier, when you have written contract, when you have all this proof, it becomes a proof of your employment. So tomorrow when you go to some other company, some other organization and ask for a raise and you tell them that I want higher salary, you can show this as a proof that, okay, this is the salary I used to get, this is my salary slip, this is my employment certificate, this is how much I used to earn. On the basis of that, you can demand a higher salary. On the other hand, if you are, let's say, in informal employment, there is no proof of how much you are earning, what date did you join, was there any increment given to you. All these written contracts form the basis of your work history and they help you progress as a professional. This is only a factor in formal employment. Informal employment or informal jobs, informal sector does not have any of this. Informal employees or informal employment has all these issues. No contracts means there is a lot of uncertainty. You will only get paid for the job that you have done. Like in a normal job, you work for not 7 days a week, either 6 days a week or 5 days a week, but you get salary for all the 7 days. In informal employment, it will be like, no, you only get paid for the number of days that you come. If you don't come on a certain day of a week, I will not give you salary for that. So there is no job assurance, there is no written contract, there are no benefits attached to it. As I said earlier, you're pregnant, you are ill, something wrong happened, doesn't really matter. In most of the formal companies, you get certain paid leaves. You might have heard this term, paid leaves, that these are the number of days for which you can take a leave and you will still get paid. So in companies, for example, let's say some companies might say that in a year, I'll give you 20 days of paid leave or 24 days of paid leave, depending on company to company. In informal employment, that is not the case. In informal employment, every single day that you don't come will be a day that you will not get paid. Then there is also job insecurity, no notice period, nothing. You will be removed from the job whenever they want you. They are not bound to tell you in advance. They are not bound to give any notice period, any explanation. Now, it works on your basis because you might also do the same to the company. If you want to leave the job, you can just stop turning up from the next day onward. They can't do much. But it brings a lot of uncertainty with the job. It brings a lot of uncertainty about whether will I even earn some money next month or not. Whether this is the last month of my earning or not. Then low wages, because again, you don't have a proof to show how much you earned in the last job. And when you don't have that proof, you can't ask for a raise. How will you tell them, see, I used to earn 20,000 rupees or 50,000 rupees in the last job, I want 60,000 now. And they will ask you for a proof, you don't have anything. In formal employments, you get a salary slip, you get all the paperwork, there is a contract that is made. In informal jobs, nothing like that exists. So it kind of takes away your ability to actually ask for a higher raise or to ask for more money because you can't show any proof of the work that you had done earlier. And that becomes a big problem. This is why the government does not want a lot of informal sector, because getting data from informal sector also is difficult. When the government collects data about the GDP, the number of people who are working in the economy, it's very difficult to get data from informal sector. From formal sector, there are various ways in which the government can collect the data. There are many government agencies that do this. But the informal sector becomes a problem. So the government tries to reduce this. Having said that, do you know right now, the distribution of workforce in India is humongously in favor of informal sector. 94%, you heard this right, 94% of India's workforce is employed only in informal sector. Do you know that? Only 6% of India's workforce works in the formal sector. There's such a huge gap, 94 and 6. And that is why whenever the government GDP numbers come out, there is a lot of debate about whether is it accurate or not. Because to get data from informal sector gets very difficult. And that is why it is said that India's real GDP may be much higher than what is reported, because a lot of informal sector also exists in the country. Now, let's look into the different types of workers that exist in an economy. We just talked about different types of employments, that is informal and formal employment. Now we're looking into different types of workers that we have in an economy. So depending on different sectors, there are different workers. For example, mainly you can categorize them into three big categories. Self-employed workers that have their own business or that have their own setup. Regular salaried employees, the ones that you usually see working in the corporates or working for the government of India. Then there are casual wage workers who are working on a day-to-day basis. For every single day when they get up, they have to find a job. They have to find employment for that very day. These are the usual categories of workers that we have. Now, a lot of people usually get confused between self-employed and casual wage workers. Again, self-employed means it is your own business. Let's say you're a shopkeeper. You're the shopkeeper, you are the owner of the business. You decide on which day do you want to open the shop. You decide on which day you don't feel like working, so you keep the shop shut. That is your own enterprise. So you are a self-employed worker there. On the other hand, if you are a laborer, in every big city, there is a place where you can go in the morning and hire daily wage workers. If you are a worker who looks for a job or an employment on a per day basis, and you get paid on the basis of that particular day, then you come in the category of casual wage workers. So agricultural laborers, construction laborers, daily wage workers come here. On the other hand, shopkeepers, farmers, small scale manufacturers, they are the ones who come in the self-employed category. And in the middle, the most stable of it is the regular salaried, the employed worker who has a fixed salary. They have to go to the office, be it a private or the government sector. This is how the types of workers have been divided on the basis of the employment that they have. Now, how many of them are in the country means in our workforce. What forms the majority of our workforce? That is important to remember. Again, I told you earlier as well, it is not necessary for you to remember the exact data, but it is important for you to remember the trend. For example, the UPSC will not ask you that what percentage of India's workforce is regular salary. They will not ask you this. You don't have to remember the 23% number or 52% number or 25% number. But they can ask you to put this in increasing or decreasing order. So if they ask you to put in increasing or decreasing order, for that you should know that the biggest part of our workforce is actually this, the self-employed worker. Why? The reason is that farmers are here. Farmers form the biggest part of our workforce. So in whichever category you put the farmers, usually that is obviously expected to be the biggest category. So because of that, the self-employed workers, they are the ones who form the biggest portion of our workforce. After that comes the casual wage workers, and after that, the third one comes the salaried employed workers who are working for the government, who are working for some formal companies, etc. Again, you don't have to remember the exact percentage, but do try and remember the trend of increasing or decreasing, which is more than the other, because this kind of thing can be asked. Now, one other very interesting thing that has come up in India in the past few years is something called gig workers, or another word is gig economy. Now, what is gig economy? What are gig workers? It has become a very trendy word in the past few years in India, because a lot of big companies have come up in India that have started to push gig economy further. You all would have heard or maybe even used companies such as Swiggy, Zomato, Uber, Ola. All these are examples of what you call as gig economies or gig companies. Now, what happens in this case? Let's take an example of Swiggy or Zomato. Now, they have lakhs of delivery workers. They have lakhs of people employed whose responsibility is that they will deliver the food or whatever order that you have done to your house. Are these full-time employees of Zomato or Swiggy? No. These are not their full-time employees. These are the people who are working with Zomato or Swiggy, but as a gig economy worker. So, for example, these workers get paid per order basis. So, let's say today there was a delivery guy from Swiggy that delivered 10 orders. So, on the basis of that, for each and every order, let's say the person gets 30 rupees or 40 or 20, whatever. Let's say the person gets 30 rupees per order. So, for that day, the person will be paid 300 rupees because they delivered 10 orders, as simple as that. So, depending upon how many orders have they delivered, depending on how much work they have done, they will be paid. They are not full-time employees of Zomato or Swiggy. The reason is simple, that when a company hires a full-time employee, they have to give them a lot of benefits. Remember, we just discussed in the formal sector, there are many benefits that have to be offered, like the maternity benefit, PF, health insurance, all that has to be given. The companies want to avoid that. They don't want that kind of a situation to come in, because if Swiggy or Zomato give or consider these people, the delivery people, as a full-time employee, then the number of people that they have to employ would be huge and they can't afford that. Also, in this way, they are easy to keep a track of. So today, if a delivery boy doesn't come, they are not concerned about that, because the day he doesn't come, he won't get a salary, as simple as that. So it works for both. It works for the benefit of the company, it works for the benefit of the employee as well. This is how gig economy is different. So it allows a lot of freedom to these companies. Now think of it from the point of view of the employee, the person who is delivering this food. For them also, in a lot of cases, it is a good proposition to have. For example, they are not bound as such by the fact that they have to be working 24/7 or they have to be working every day of the week. It is a good use case for those who just want to spend a bit of time and earn some money in return for that. So for example, let's say there's a person who does another job but is not satisfied with the income that they are getting. They can work for these companies 3 or 4 hours a day or 2 to 3 hours a day and earn some extra income from there. That is how the gig economy functions. So number of gig workers in India have increased considerably in the past few years because of these companies. Exactly the same is the case of companies such as Ola, Uber. The drivers that drive cars for these companies are not their full-time employees. These drivers again are gig employees. So they decide how many days a week do they want to work. They decide whether they want to work on a certain day or whether they don't want to work on a certain day. They'll only be paid according to how many hours they have logged in. Now, as you can see, the growth of gig economy in India has been huge. In 2021-22, the number of gig workers in India were about 77 lakh. March 2025 expected to grow to 2 crores. By 2029-30, it's expected to go to 2.35 crore. As more and more companies are entering this field, we are seeing a boom in this opportunity for the companies, and again from the point of view of employees as well. Please understand, it is a win-win situation for both the parties as long as they understand the pros and cons of it. As long as you understand what you're getting into, it is not a bad option to explore for anyone. And this is where it helps them immensely. These are the pros and cons of gig economy. Important to understand, these questions have also been asked in the past. Pro, first, it gives you a much greater flexibility. And again, flexibility on both sides. From the side of the employees, it gives them flexibility to decide when do they want to work, when do they not want to work. If they want to take a certain day off, they can, and not just how many days. In fact, what time of the day do they want to work? Let's say there is someone who is available only early morning. There is someone who is available only in the night. Depending upon that, they are giving you the flexibility to decide whenever you want to work. So it provides you much greater flexibility. It also gives you much more variety. There are a lot of these companies available. You can do a bunch of things, drive the car, deliver food, deliver package, deliver parcel. All of these are an example. And similar is the case, and I'll just give you a few examples, but you can take so many other examples. You use Amazon, Flipkart, etc. The things that you order, when they're delivered to your place, so the guy who is coming for delivery, they are not employees or full-time workers for Amazon or Flipkart. They are again working for a delivery company where they are getting paid on the basis of the per delivery charge that they actually are getting. Nothing more than that. Apart from that, it also gives them much better independence. As I said, they are free to choose which day do they want to work. They are free to choose if they want to continue working for a company or not. If they want to leave immediately, they can. There is not much notice period that is involved here. It also allows better work-life balance. If you are someone who is fed up that the company is asking you to work longer hours and you don't want to, you can in a gig economy. There is no issue with that. So it allows you a lot of flexibility. So it's especially suitable for those who don't think that it is a very long-term thing for them, who want to do it for a short term, earn some money, earn some kind of a stability, and then move on to other things. On the other hand, obviously not everything is hunky-dory. There are obviously some other issues, some other cons attached to it. First big con is irregular income. Because see, the income, let's say you are a delivery person for Swiggy or Zomato. Your income does not depend upon you. It depends upon the number of orders that you are getting. Let's imagine it's a day where the weather conditions are very bad, right? Let's say it's raining heavily or it's too hot. In any of the case, let's say the restaurants are closed or something else has happened, then you can't earn, as simple as that. If the people are not giving enough orders, the people don't demand enough food, then there's not much that you can do. So your income is irregular and it mainly depends on factors which you do not control. In a formal employment, your work, the amount of work that you are doing, the quality of work that you are doing will improve your chances to get a promotion. But in this kind of an economy, in this kind of a job, it doesn't really depend on you whether you get a promotion or not. Complex taxes for the company especially, how to show these people as a full-time employee or a part-time employee, how much taxes to deduct. It's such a slightly complicated structure because it's such a new field in India that we are still getting used to it. When it's a new field, you still don't know how to charge them, you still don't know what laws will apply, what laws will not apply. We have laws about this, but it's still an emerging field. So a lot of policy and tax or law decisions have to still be made on this. No benefit, that's one big problem with this. No benefits as in, God forbid if something wrong happens to you. You meet an accident, you fall ill, you are not able to work, you will not get paid. You only get paid for the amount of deliveries that you do, for the number of days that you come on the job. Even if you are not fine or even if you are not good enough to work for one single day, there is no extra benefit given to you. No health insurance, no other benefit, no other money to be given to you, only the money that you earn on a per delivery basis. Then fewer connections. So it does not really allow you to come in contact with a lot of other people working for the company. See, one big advantage that you get when you're in a formal employment is you make connections, you come in touch with other people, explore more opportunities, come in touch with them, discuss what they are thinking, and then maybe grow better in your career. In these kind of employment opportunities, there is not much engagement that you have with anyone else. It is just you and there's no one else. You are just doing your own work. You're a silo worker, means working alone, and you don't matter. You are not concerned with anyone else's working. That is a big problem. So even if you start your career, let's say in this economy, there are not many prospects of making it big later on. You'll be stuck doing the same job. As long as you're happy doing the same thing, then it is not a problem. But if the aim is that later on you want to grow up, or you want to, let's say, have a promotion or do something else, then it would not really give you the kind of benefit or the kind of path in a career that you are hoping for. These are certain problems with the gig economy as of today. As we discussed, the challenges part, low wages in many cases. You would have seen these news stories as well. Zomato, Swiggy delivery workers protesting that they're getting a much lower wages than earlier. So in many of the cases, for example, they get a wage of 20-25 rupees per order delivery. So whatever order that they have given, 20-25 rupees is what they get. There's lack of job security. The company can throw them out whenever they want. If the company thinks that in a certain area, we don't have enough restaurants, but we have too many delivery workers, and they're obviously not getting, most of them are not getting the job, then the company can just ask them not to come from tomorrow. Limited social security, no other benefits, no insurance, nothing else has to be provided by the company. It has had a lot of impact. It has given a lot of jobs. It has led to a bump in the GDP. There's no denying that. There are so many companies that are coming up. So many big companies have been established on the basis of this gig economy. The companies which otherwise would not have been able to function if this gig economy structure did not exist. Think of all these companies that are into delivery of food and into delivery of services, courier delivery. All of them work and flourish on this basis only. Otherwise, if they had to employ all of these delivery workers full time, then they would not have been able to afford all this success. That is a big issue. On the other hand, there are many factors that have led to the growth. Why and how is it that these companies and these apps have become famous? One very important factor is digitalization. Almost everyone has a smartphone in their hands. Almost everyone who has a smartphone has access to data. Not too long ago, if you go back a few years before the introduction of Jio, for example, the data packs available were not that cheap. I still remember a time where the monthly recharge used to be 250 rupees. In those 250 rupees, you used to get certain talk time and you used to get only 1 GB data for the month. So if you consume that 1 GB data in the entire month, that is gone now. Then entered Jio, where they made it almost free to have data, where it was available in unlimited manner, which forced the other companies also to reduce and drastically cut down the rates. The situation is today, India has one of the cheapest data rates in the entire world. In most of the countries, you do not get data. When I said data, I mean internet recharge. In most of the countries, you do not get internet recharge at such a cheap price as is in the case of India. The result is that a lot of digitalization has happened. That you have access to smart devices, you have access to internet, you can afford it, and as a result of this, you can use these apps. Because if internet was not accessible on such a large scale, none of these apps would have been such a success as they are right now. The other aspect of why this area has grown is because of flexible hour demand. As more and more people are looking for extra income, are looking to work for few hours a day and not an entire full-time job, and they are looking to work on their basis whenever they feel like working, there's an increased demand for having flexible working. There's an increased demand that they should decide when they want to go to work, they should be able to decide when they want to take an off. This kind of flexibility is usually not available in formal jobs. This kind of availability or this kind of flexibility is only something that comes with these gig economy jobs, which is why it has become such an important boon. Because of economic shifts, as I told you, our economy is shifting towards more and more app-based economies where people are ordering things and they want these things to be delivered immediately. All of this has led to a big boost for these economies. Now, as so many people are working here, crores and crores of people are now getting employed as gig economy workers, governments have also realized that they cannot just leave this sector without any framework or without any security. There has been a lot of debate, especially around whether or not they should have health insurance, accidental insurance or not. Because think about it. Most of their job is just about roaming on the roads from one place to the other place. Thus, they are more susceptible to getting injured, they are more susceptible to getting into an accident. So, in such a scenario, for them especially, it is important to have health insurance, accidental cover, etc. Because these companies don't offer such benefit, companies say that no, these are not our full-time employees, why do we give them such benefits? The companies don't offer them benefits. So, what has happened is certain state governments have taken a lead in this. Rajasthan government, for example, has been the pioneer in this. Rajasthan government in 2023 passed an act especially for gig economy workers about making a fund where money will be used for the welfare of the gig economy workers, where the gig economy workers especially will be allowed, or where their insurance will be taken care of, where they will be helped in every way possible. This is something that Rajasthan government did in the beginning, and then many other state governments also followed suit. So there is an increasing awareness on the side of the governments as well, where the governments have realized the fact that you cannot let the companies run the show as in and when they want. You have to give some kind of assurance, some kind of backing to the gig economy workers as well. Now, the reason why the governments are also encouraging this kind of job is that they have realized that gig economy has played a very important role in employment generation. We took some numbers earlier as well. Again, repeating, by 2030, it is expected that the gig economy especially will contribute 1.25% to India's GDP, which is a huge number. By the same time, it is expected that about 9 crore jobs will be generated in the long term. And this is a number which is too big to ignore. Government expects that 4.1% of total workforce will be made up of gig economy in India's labor sector. And again, this is a huge number. It involves crores of people. There are two aspects to look at it. Recently, in a government event, you would have seen, and it led to a lot of debate as well, India's Commerce Minister, Shri Piyush Goyal, made a statement that he was not very happy with how all the startups are working in the field of gig economy only. He made a statement saying that these companies are taking advantage of the cheap labor available in India. What he meant to say was, the reason why these companies are getting successful in India, the reason why these companies are able to work in India is because of availability of cheap labor. People ready to work at a much lower price, at a much lower salary. Same business model would not work in Europe or in America. The reason being that if you are employing someone to work there as a delivery boy, you have to pay them much more salary as compared to what you are paying here. So gig economy, as per the government, as per the statement of the minister, is not a new innovation. Rather, it is something that is taking advantage of low paying labor, low skilled labor in India. The startups obviously are very unhappy with this. They don't see it that way. For the startups, it is an innovation. They are giving employment to crores of people, which is a fact. Gig economy also offers alternative revenue stream, especially for those in tier 2, tier 3 cities. In a lot of tier 2, tier 3 cities, now you do see these companies operational, you do see these companies working. Wherever these companies are operational now, wherever they are working, what it means is you are giving employment opportunities to those who earlier did not have much scope. So all of that has worked in their favor. Apart from that, women also stand to benefit from this. Now, I'll add one more thing to it. So far, for example, we have been looking only from the point of view of the workers. But think about it. And we will just take example of Swiggy and Zomato right now. As Swiggy and Zomato have expanded, the result also is that a lot of other people are now opening up what they call as cloud kitchens. A lot more people are now, for example, selling food from their own house without opening up a full-fledged restaurant. That has also created employment opportunities. Earlier, if you were selling food, either you have to have your own proper restaurant set up, you should have enough space for the people to come and sit, consume food, or the other option was to become a roadside seller, a food vendor. but something in between, that is a cloud kitchen, where you just need to have your kitchen, you don't have to have a space for people to come and sit. That has also come in, wherein you have an option where you just prepare your food and that will be given away for the delivery. So it has created employment. These companies have created employment not just for the delivery workers as such, but they have also given employment in the way of ensuring more and more cloud kitchens, for example, open up. This is where gig economy, the debate about gig economy, about whether is it innovative or not, is one side of the story. You may agree or you may disagree with it. When the Commerce Minister says that this is not any innovation, you may agree with him. But you cannot deny the fact that it has given a boost to the economy. You cannot deny the fact that it has led to employment of crores of people. That is a fact that cannot be ignored. Also, gig economy especially was dominated by high income earners. Now it has become a very popular workforce, or it has become a very popular option to work. Means gig economy is not just about low paying jobs, it's not just about the delivery workers. It works on a high level also. For example, let's say there are people who are very well skilled professionals. They offer their services to the companies on a case to case basis, on a consulting basis as well. They are not full-time employees of the companies. They are consultant, they are professional, they may just go and pay a visit, give them a few hours of their expertise and then they go away. So gig economy is not just restricted to one specific segment of our population. On the contrary, earlier gig economy was restricted to the high income professionals. It is now that we have seen that gig economy has now breached that, and we see gig economy covering people who are in the lower segment of the society as well. It is also poised to become a major driver of job creation in the field, new fields emerging like artificial intelligence, etc. As more and more people are taking up courses, are developing their expertise in such area, we will see expansion of workers in the gig economy in the coming years as well. And the government should better be ready about this. These are the different sectors where you see different types of gig economies which are working. Some very high skilled, for example, doctors, tutors, cooks, all of these beauty professionals, etc., that work on a per hour basis. For example, you want a certain kind of beauty treatment, you call someone at home, for example, you might have heard of this company called Urban Clap, or Urban Company as it was called earlier, where whatever professional you require, you can book their services, they'll come to your place. It can be an electrician, plumber, carpenter, it can also be someone providing beauty services, etc. All these are gig economy workers. Then there are semi-skilled workers, there are cab drivers, etc., aspiring entrepreneurs. All of these together form what we call as a gig economy. And as it expands more and more, rather than ignoring it, rather than criticizing it, that it is not innovative enough, it will be better for the government to create a framework around it, to make sure that they make the environment conducive enough for different companies, for different people to come and work in this sector, which will be beneficial for both the companies, the governments, and the employees as well. Now, moving away from the idea of gig economy, there is also one more factor that is very important for any economy, that is a worker population ratio. As the name suggests, it is the ratio of the number of people who are working divided by the total people in the population, that tells you how many people are actually contributing to the economy, how many people are contributing to the income of the country, how many people are contributing to the GDP. It's a function of many things. For example, it is a function of the age that the country has. Like, for example, for India, we all read about the fact that India is very lucky that we are in the stage of demographic dividend right now. Demographic dividend means India right now has more people in the working age population as compared to those who are dependent. For example, in case of India right now, our average age is 28.4 years, which is pretty young. Just for comparison, if you compare this with, let's say, Japan, the average age in Japan is above 45 years. So the result is that in Japan, the number of people in the working age population are lower as compared to the number of people in our working age population. That's a situation of demographic dividend. That's a very advantageous position for any nation, because it means that you are in a situation where a lot more people are contributing to the economy as compared to those who are kind of a burden or who are dependent on the government to take advantage of the government resources. This is where it is important for us to improve our worker population ratio. So let's look at a few numbers and let's look at where we stand. As I told you, worker population ratio simply is a ratio of total workers upon the total population into 100. In India, for example, it's about 35%, 34.9%, obviously keeps on changing. Now, one problem with this kind of a number is, in India, it is extremely difficult to get the exact data in such cases. Why? Because how does a government get to know how many people are employed and how many people are not employed? Usually government tries to see how many people are paying taxes, how many people have their PF being deducted from the salary, but this can never be 100% correct data. Because India has so many people in the informal sector, because of the huge informal sector that we have, the result is that from this sector, the amount of information that comes in is always restricted. You do not have 100% correct information here. Similarly, even when the GDP numbers come out from India, there's always a view that even the GDP numbers from India are kind of suppressed, because there is still a huge informal population or informal worker ratio, which is hard to count. Also, there are so many unpaid workers in India. Unpaid worker, for example, let's say someone who is a housewife, someone who is working in the household, taking care of the household the entire day, but they are not getting paid for it. Since they are not getting paid for it, we do not count them. That is a wrong aspect, or that is a wrong way of calculating a GDP. And that is a big problem. So while we do have this number, but almost everyone agrees to the fact that this is not a very accurate number. That in reality, our worker ratio or the worker population ratio would be higher. In reality, more people would be employed, because it's difficult to get the numbers. That is why we settle at this, close to 35%. Now, there is obviously a big disparity between how this is divided between urban and rural, and how is it divided between male and female. Now, please do keep this in mind. The data that you see on the screen, since I have taken this one from NCERT, that data is only till 2017-18. I'll just, after this, I'll show you a better updated data as well. But in the NCERT, the data that you will see is up to 2017-18. As per that data, India's total worker population ratio 34.7%, rural areas 35%, urban 33.9%. Now, this might be surprising to a lot of people, because the assumption here that many people have is that the worker population ratio in urban areas should be higher. You expect that there will be more jobs in the urban areas as compared to rural areas, right? But the one thing, or the one fact that you overlook here is that in rural areas, when people don't have jobs, a lot of them then go towards agriculture. So even if they are not adding a lot of productivity to that, but they become a part of the agricultural labor force. So in that sense, they get slightly more working opportunity as compared to urban areas. In urban areas, you do not have that option of going ahead and working in the field of agriculture. So this is why usually you will see that in the rural areas, the workforce participation ratio is higher as compared to urban areas. Again, I am telling you, you don't have to remember the exact data, the exact number. As long as you remember which is higher and lower, that would be good enough. If you look at male and female, male obviously much higher, 52.1% of male working population, male population is working. For female, it was 16.5 in 2017-18. Again, please do understand, it was in 2017-18 that this number was low. Since then, there has been a stark improvement. As of today, the female worker population ratio has gone above 40%. above 40%. So out of all the females in the country, 40% lump sum are in the workforce side now. So the worker population ratio has improved for both male and female, but for females especially it has improved. It is still lower than many other countries around the world. It is still a problem that a lot of female workers in India don't become a part of the workforce, and there are many reasons attached to it. There's a big problem of gender disparity. It is still a mindset in a lot of families that women or girls should not be allowed to go out and work. Many of them believe that they should be restricted to their household. There's no point of them going outside. There are also issues of education disparity in a lot of families. If they have to decide that we can only get one of our kids educated between a boy and a girl, in most cases they choose the boy. So even the education levels on average, in that also you will see a disparity between male and female, and that disparity then carries on into employment as well. It starts at the education level and it goes till the employment aspect of it as well. This is a more updated data. This I have taken from the government website. The last data that you saw was up till 2017-18, that was from the NCERT. This data I have taken from the government's own periodic labor force survey. This is a survey of the government about labor force in India. Periodic labor force survey. Look at what this survey says. So this survey basically tells us about, again, the participation of people in the workforce. 78.8 they are saying is total. Now please understand this. This number is not counting all the people in India. They are counting the number of workers divided by people who are above 15 years of age. Because what is the point of counting 8 years old or 5-year-old kids? They are obviously not going to work. There is no point of counting them. So periodic labor force survey, how it calculates the worker population ratio is total workers in India divided by the population of India, it is above 15 years. So that is 78.8 in total. Amongst the males it is 60.1. Amongst females, as I told you, it has breached the 40% mark, in fact 41.7%. That is the data of periodic labor force survey 2023-24. But again, please remember, in this survey, they are counting not the entire population and the denominator. In the denominator, they are using population of people who are aged above 15, who are eligible to work basically. So total number of people who are working divided by those who are above 15, that's how they come to this data. So there has been a stark improvement in the female labor force participation in India. Again, there is still a lot of scope to improve, but it has been on an upward trend, which is a very good case for the entire economy. Now, if you look at the worker population ratio, this is a pretty interesting topic where questions are asked very regularly. There are many aspects attached to it. It tells us how many people are actually dependent on those who are working. Please understand this. For any government, for any economy, it is in their favor that the number of people who are dependent should be lesser. Why? When you have people who are dependent, the idea is that their healthcare, their education, their insurance, etc., all that becomes a responsibility of the government. The government, in ideal case, would not like to have that. Also, the population divide between urban and rural areas. As we discussed earlier, in the rural areas, the worker population ratio is higher. There is no doubt about that. But the reason why it is higher is not because they have more productivity. The reason why it is higher is the availability of agriculture as a fallback option, where they know that, okay, if I'm not doing anything, at least I'm doing agriculture, at least I'm doing this part, that will be taken care of. That is a big problem, because later on we will study a problem in India which is called as disguised unemployment. We will study about different types of unemployment. One of them is called disguised unemployment. Disguised unemployment is seen in large numbers, especially in agriculture. The idea is, let's say there is a job for which only 20 people are required, but there are 50 people who are working on that job. So the remaining 30 are extra, they are not adding any value. Even if you remove these 30 people, the work will be done in exactly the same speed with the same efficiency. So those 30 people are actually in a disguised unemployment situation where they are not adding any productivity. Indian agriculture suffers from this problem mainly because despite occupying over 45% of India's workforce, it only contributes around 17% to the Indian GDP. That is a huge problem. Because of this, if you look at in the rural areas, many people seem to be employed. Many people seem like they have a work and they'll go to the field, etc. But are they adding any productive value? No. The worker population ratio does not look into how much productivity you are bringing. It just looks into whether you are employed or not, whether you are working or not. That is why in the rural areas, you will see this number being higher than the urban areas, but that does not essentially mean that they are being more productive than people in the urban areas. Do remember that part. Then the educational issue, as I told you, when you have a lower level of education, especially let's say amongst females as compared to males, the result is that their participation in the workforce also is lower and compared to their counterpart. That's a big problem. There is gender disparity, as we discussed, access to opportunities, and also the mindset of a lot of families. A lot of families just don't, especially in the rural areas, do not want women to go out to work. Even in the urban areas, a lot of women, especially for example after they are married, even though they may be qualified enough to get a good job, they will not get a job because in many cases they are just not allowed to go out and explore any employment opportunities. This is a big problem that we have, because of which the worker population ratio has still become a problem. We were discussing about the female labor force participation specifically, because it is important for not just the females but for the entire economy that more and more people go out and contribute. Now, there are two aspects to look at it. Number one, without a doubt, and we discussed this earlier, there is no doubt about the fact that the female labor force participation has been improving consistently year on year. This is still 2022-23. I showed you earlier 23-24, the number had crossed the 41% mark as well. So again, it's a good sign that it has been improving, but put that into context with the other countries in the world, especially developed countries in the world. Just compare that and you will see there is still a huge gap when it comes to labor force participation in India. You look at rural data, you look at urban data here, how it has improved from 2017 to 2024. For example, the labor force participation here from 2017-18 to 23-24, it has increased from 23% to about 41%. In the urban areas also, it has seen an improvement. In the rural areas also, it has seen a drastic improvement. And even today, it remains more in the rural areas and urban areas. How much more, that keeps on changing. But even among the females, again, the female labor force participation in rural areas is higher. Again, the logic is the same, that many of them contribute to agriculture, many of them contribute to with the other members in the household on the same agriculture field, where 10 people are required, 15 people are employed. That is how the labor force participation increases in the rural areas. Now, how are they divided? Especially we are talking about females, especially in which sector are they employed mostly? 60% of females in India are employed in informal sector, in agriculture related jobs, 20% formal jobs, and 20% others. Now, this is why we have to understand that it is appreciable that more women are forming a part of the workforce, but it would be even more appreciable if they actually contribute handsomely to the economic output, which is not happening. It is not happening because they are contributing mainly in the agriculture sector, and this is a sector that has the issue of informal, or that has the issue of disguised unemployment. So yes, the number of females are increasing, but it has not adding up to the productivity part of it. The government is trying to give a push to this. If you remember in the last chapter, when we were talking about rural development in India, the government is focusing a lot on allied activities, like say dairy sector, fisheries, etc. The government wants to give a push because the government thinks that these are the areas where women can play a much bigger role. And the government wants to transfer this women workforce from agriculture per se, where they may not be adding a lot of productivity, to these allied sector like dairy, fisheries, etc., where the government thinks that they can contribute in a much better manner. It's a long-term objective of the government. It will take some time for this to be translated on the ground, but this is what the government's point of view is. In terms of different economic sectors, primary sector contributes participation of entire workforce. Now this is the workforce distribution for the entire workforce. Now we are not talking about only women. As I told you earlier, agriculture employs most number of people in India, 44.6%, but its contribution to our GDP has still been lingering around 17%. Secondary sector that you call as industry, where 24.4% people are employed, and then the tertiary sector, which is the services, where 31% people are employed. In terms of their contribution to the Indian GDP, the biggest contribution comes in from services part, that is the bulkiest, the biggest contributor. Second comes in from industry part, and the third is from agriculture part. So if you look at agriculture especially, there is a mismatch between the number of people that they employ and the amount of contribution that they are making to Indian GDP. Which means, number one, we have to improve our productivity. The government is trying to do that by using new kind of technologies in agriculture. Secondly, the government has to push people away from core agricultural activities, rather focusing on allied sector, dairy, livestock, horticulture, etc. That can be extremely helpful for the government and for this sector specifically. Again, this is the distribution of entire workforce, not just women. This is male plus female and how they are deployed. We were discussing about female labor force participation, and this question is very commonly asked. Why is it that we have a lower female labor force participation? Why is it that in India specifically, lesser number of female go out to work as compared to other countries, even in developing countries? First big reason being the safety concern. And there is no denying that. It's very sad, but at the same time reality. You cannot expect in many of the Indian cities females to be safe when they are returning from the office late at night. In most of the cases, the females don't feel safe enough to return from the office in the evening or after evening. The companies also have to make special arrangements if that is the case. I still remember in many of the, let's say there are many companies that offer cab services, where a cab will go and drop the employee. If a cab is going to drop the employees home, most of the companies have this policy that female employee will not be the last one to be dropped home. Understand? The female employee will not be the last one to be dropped home. So if the cab has a female and a male, the female first will be dropped and then a male will be dropped. Another policy that many companies have, that whenever these cabs, when they are going and they will drop off a female employee, the cab must have a security guard inside of it. Along with the driver, a security guard will be sitting. So these are some of the things that some companies do, but again, in an ideal situation, in an ideal society, you would not have to do this. Sadly, we are not living in an ideal society, but that is one big problem because of which you do not see a lot of women working, that is safety concern. Second issue that we have is the double burden. Means the problem is that even after women go out and work, they are still expected to come back and take care of the household. The household duty part never goes away from their responsibility somehow. Even if they are also a working partner, even if they are also contributing in the household the same way as a male member is, even then they would be expected to take care of the household activities. Now that adds a double burden over them. Not only are they expected to take care of the working part or the earning part, but they're also expected to take care of the household, so that becomes a double burden. As I said earlier, the GDP data, the GDP numbers that we have in a lot of cases are not very accurate. The reason being that a lot of females are doing stuff that is unpaid. So the stuff that they're doing at home, the responsibilities that they have at their home, that is not really paid for. And because they don't get paid for it, it is not counted in the GDP. That is a big problem. So in reality, there may be more women in our workforce, but they're not counted as working members because they're not getting paid for it. That is a big problem. Then the education part. As I said, after, Government of India, for example, has a right to education law. So until a certain age, you will get free education. However, once that is done, once the free education part is done, and the parents have to pay a fee, in a lot of cases, the parents then, if they have multiple kids, have to take a call, can they send all the kids to school, or do they choose which kid to send to school, which kid not to send to school. Unfortunately, in a lot of these cases, the behavior shown in the family is that they prefer sending the male kid to the school as compared to female. That is why the dropout rate amongst girls, amongst females is much higher. The dropout rate means the number of people who are not going ahead with higher education, school dropout, etc. becomes a problem. In a lot of schools in India, we do not even have separate washroom facilities for girls. That is even a bigger concern. All that is a big problem that we have seen in India. Something that has to be looked into. So a structural reform has to be made if we want to ensure more or better labor force participation for females. Then there is a problem of digital divide as well. Let me ask you a simple question here and answer very, very, very honestly in your mind, okay? Let's assume your household has only one mobile phone, okay? Now tell me, what are the chances or what is the probability this mobile phone will be with your father or your mother? Think about this. And think very honestly, if your household has only one mobile phone, what is the probability that this mobile phone will be with the father or will be with the mother? Who has a higher probability of keeping it? If you are being honest, in most of the cases, your answer will be that it will be with the father. We do not even require, or I did not even share details like, is the father even working or not? Is the mother working or not? But that is the reality. This is a digital divide that we see here. That more technology, more information usually first comes into the males in the family and then goes to the females. That is a big issue. A lot of government initiatives may not even reach the females because they are not connected to internet or they don't have the digital access. So not just do we have digital divide between rural and urban, we also have a digital divide between male and female that has not been corrected so far. So that is also a big problem that has to be clarified. Social protection, we do have laws for unorganized labor. As I told you, unorganized or informal labor in India is much higher in number as compared to formal labor. Females, especially in this part of the workforce, do see a lot of discrimination. They are susceptible to be exploited much more than male counterparts. That is a big problem and the government has to solve that issue as well. Then there's increased household income. Now, as I said, as more household income comes in, as more and more income comes in, one of the perception in the family is that why do the women now need to work? If the male, for example, gets a promotion, if the male in the family says, I am now earning a handsome amount, there is no point of anyone else working. You have seen a large dropout of females from the workforce because of this reason. The reason being that the male in the family has started to earn better. Now the females don't have to contribute anymore. I'm not saying there's anything wrong in that, but the problem is the overall contribution to the economy then suffers. Also, a female who earns herself is much more independent as compared to a situation where there is only one earning member in the family. So it's a better situation for her as well, but there has been a significant dropout rate of female from the workforce in such. One of the other very interesting things that we must look at here is how the employment structure has changed in India, in the sense that there are three main sectors that make up our economy. First, the primary sector, mainly the agriculture. Then the secondary sector, that is mainly the industries, manufacturing, refineries, etc. And then the third part of our GDP is made up of services, which contributes the most. Over the years, if you look at the trend since our independence, there has been a very interesting change in how many people are employed in different areas. Now, interestingly, the largest scale of employment in terms of these three sectors in India is still agriculture. It employs close to 44 to 45% people of the Indian workforce. However, it only contributes around 17% to our GDP. So the government has been trying to move people away from agriculture and convince them to take up other opportunities. Now, in this part, we'll be seeing some of the data, some of the numbers of how this employment structure has changed and what is it that the government is doing to push it even further. Now, as I said, if you start from where we were at the time of our independence, when we were independent, that is 1947 or 1950, when the constitution came into being, a big part of our population, an overwhelming part of our population was employed only in agriculture, because that was one field where you would not require a lot of skills or machinery or a lot of investment. This was something that a lot of people used to take up because their family was associated with them. So they do not really have to have any specific skill for that. However, gradually it started to change, and mainly after 1991, especially it started to change. After 1991, as more and more foreign investment came in, a lot more brands came in, we saw a lot more formalization of the economy, means many more formal opportunities to get a job came up as compared to what was the case earlier. Now, the employment growth rate, that is the number of people who have been able to find employment, has been going up, which is a good sign for any country. As we discussed earlier, the more people that are employed, the better are the government revenues in the form of taxes. Lower are the number of people who are dependent on government schemes, on welfare cases to take help. So the government would obviously like a higher employment rate and a lower unemployment. And this is what we saw in India as well after our independence. However, in the recent years, this is a very interesting issue that has come up. Something called jobless growth. Now, this phrase became famous when a few years earlier, Raghuram Rajan, that is the ex-RBI governor, in one of the lectures that he was giving, he was talking about Indian economy, and he said that Indian economy has been going through a phase of what you call as jobless growth. Meaning that while the overall economy, the overall GDP data seems to be increasing, it seems to be on the right path, that yes, we are making a continuous steady progress, but on the other hand, the number of jobs that should have come with that has not been seen. Now, why is that, or how is that possible? The simple reason for this is uneven growth. Now, imagine a situation. Let's say there are 100 people sitting in a room, okay? And all of them have a per capita income, or average income of them is 10,000 rupees per month. Now, imagine a situation where one of these people gets lucky enough to get a job offer of 1 crore rupees per year. If one of them gets a job offer of 1 crore rupees, the average here will significantly increase, right? But does this mean that all of them are contributing? Or does it mean that all of their life has become better? Not entirely. It is not that it has worked for all of them. This is the kind of a situation that you see in jobless growth. Overall GDP may be increasing because a few handful of industrialists are having a good time. They are able to swell their profit, they are able to earn more money. But on the other hand, as an average of the overall growth, it has not been able to have a positive impact. Means the number of jobs are not increasing. There is still a significant unemployment rate in the country. And this is what he referred to as jobless growth. Meaning that the government should not just chase the GDP numbers. The government should not just run after how fast are we progressing. The focus should be on the average. That is everyone in the society able to live a better life than earlier? According to him, we are facing a situation of jobless growth because our employment programs have not been running that high. Now, let me show you some data here so that we can understand the situation. Now, these are multiple data points I wanted to share with you, some from the government side and some from the private sector as well. So, first, average GDP growth from 2016 to 2023 has been 6.5%. That has been the average. Ideally, we would have wanted to go beyond 8-9%, but that has been the case. Unemployment rate from periodic labor force survey is 3.2%. Now, in economics, you read a concept of normal rate of unemployment. There is something called normal rate of unemployment. In some books, you might also read that as NIRU. Now, what exactly is this? What this means to say is that in every economy, in every country around the world, there will always be some bit of unemployment, and the average usually remains the same over a long time. There may be 1 or 2 odd years that your unemployment rate becomes very high or goes very low, but usually for every economy, there is an average normal unemployment rate that persists over a long time. For India, that number is 3 to 3.5%. So in most cases, you will see this being the unemployment rate in India. You will not be able to have an unemployment rate of 0%. That is just not practically possible. If it goes to 5-6%, becomes too high. 3-3.5% is India's usual rate of unemployment. Then a data coming in from CMI. CMI is a private organization, it's a private think tank, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. That is CMIE. They gave an unemployment rate in India in early 2025 about 8.2%. So according to them, according to this private organization, our unemployment rate is much higher than what the government is suggesting. So government's periodic labor force survey puts our unemployment rate around 3.2%, while CMIE data said about 8.2%. Apart from that, the worker population ratio that we discussed earlier has gone up to 56%. While educated youth unemployment rate means amongst those who are educated yet unemployed youth, that is very high, extremely high. Means amongst the educated youth who have gotten education with the hope that they will be able to get a job and earn money, amongst them the unemployment rate is very high. This is a major problem in India, because you spend a lot of money in getting a degree, in learning some skill set, hoping that on the basis of this you will be able to get job, repay the loan and be able to make a better life. But that is not something that is happening. That is a big problem. See, unemployment amongst those who are not skilled enough, who don't have any degree, who don't have any education, although it's not ideal, but it is still understandable. On the other hand, if someone has a proper degree, has had certain skills, even then if they are not able to find employment, then it becomes a cause of concern for the entire economy, because that means that maybe there are just not enough opportunities available. There are many challenges because of which we have seen problems of unemployment in the country. For example, one big problem, automation, meaning that a lot of stuff that was done manually by people earlier is now being done with the help of machines. Now, machines are preferable because they have much more efficiency. Unlike people who would work for 8, 9 or maybe 10 hours a day, machines can operate for 24 hours a day. They obviously reduce the cost for the factory in the long run. In the short term, there will be investment. In the long run, there will be very little investment. Do you know there was recently a documentary done about China, how China has something called dark factories now. So concept of dark factories has come into China. What are dark factories? So in China, a lot of these factories are now not employing any human. They just have machines, robots, machines that are working 24/7. Machines don't need a light. They know how to work. They're not seeing anything. So there are factories completely dark. There is no light needed there because the machines are just doing their job 24/7. Those are dark factories. Imagine this, humongous factories with no human presence. If that situation comes in India, imagine the unemployment rate it would push us for, it would push us towards. The number of people who you would have been employed in that factory otherwise, out of them all of them out of jobs, just because now their place has been taken over by these machines, by these robots. And this is why automation and technology remains one big reason. You would have seen a lot of these discussions about how AI may have a similar impact on jobs, how AI has already impacted many jobs. A lot of these big multinational companies are investing heavily in AI so that they don't have to pay humans to do the job that can be done by machines. So with more and more technology coming in, this will only increase unemployment rate unless you upskill yourself in that field, unless you yourself have understood how AI works and you can use that to your advantage. But at least where we stand right now, it's difficult for a large population to take up these courses. So right now we do have a problem of technology innovation taking away jobs. Then low labor dependency. So it depends on factory to factory, sectors to sector. There are certain sectors which are heavily dependent on machines, on big tools anyway. And the number of labor required there is anyways minimal. So you can't force a lot of people into that sector. Whatever you do, they will just not require so many people, and that also is a big problem. If there are so many sectors that don't require many people, they are low labor dependents, then you can't expect a lot of jobs there. That also is a big issue. Thirdly, there is also a problem of high skilled jobs and limited opportunities for unskilled labor. The problem that we have is, although we are going through demographic dividend, majority of our population is in the working age group, but at the same time the problem is that not many of them can be considered as skilled laborers. You know, a few years ago government had this great idea that we can be the net exporter of talent in the world, and we can still do that. With countries such as Italy, Japan, Germany, all of them are getting old. All of them have an average age of over 40. And you know, the problem with these non-English speaking countries is that they don't have a lot of people coming in from outside. Like US, etc., UK also, they don't have a very high reproduction rate, but they still are not growing old because so many young people are coming in from outside, from country like India, etc., settling there. That is not happening in countries such as Japan or Italy also, for that matter, because of the language barrier. You don't have a lot of young population coming in from outside, and thus their average age is increasing, and the number of people available to work in their industry is reducing. The government of India thought that India is well placed to supply labor to these countries, but it will only happen if our labor is skilled enough to take up those jobs. You would have seen so many news articles in the newspaper how lakhs of students who, let's say, have done their engineering, have a BTech degree, are unemployable because the skills that the country or that the companies demand are not the skills that were taught to them in the college. There is a mismatch between the skill required and the skill that they possess. That also leads to the problem of unemployment, and if not addressed, it will only accentuate going ahead. That is a big problem that we are facing. See this graph. This is a graph that shows you again the problems of jobless growth in India. So this is India's economic growth and the job opportunities that we have. So this yellow line shows you the employment growth in India, how number of jobs have increased or decreased. As you can see here, this was the COVID-19 bump. So look at the usual years. When we were growing at 6.8%, the number of jobs came down by 0.3%. Imagine. When we were growing at 6.5%, number of jobs came down by 1.2%. When we were growing by 3.7%, the jobs went up by 0.7%. So there is just no match between the GDP growth rate and the number of employment opportunities that are available in the country. And because of this gap, because of this gulf in between the two, it's very, very hard for an economy to actually push a lot of people out of poverty. Because if you want to push a bulk of your population out of poverty, you have to make sure that there is the minimum basic level of the people, that is the standard of living, increases many folds, and that is a problem that we are still facing. Now, as I said, the employment structure sector wise has changed immensely in India ever since our independence. Even now, bulk of our workforce is still employed in agriculture, so that part has remained the same. But if you look at the absolute numbers, the absolute data, you will see a very interesting picture here. Look at this. Let's take an example of how many people are employed in government as compared to private. Let's take an example of, let's say, banks here. So this is the data of scheduled commercial banks, okay? Now, this tells us the government bank data and this is the private bank data. Let's try and compare this. The public bank, that is a government bank, the number of employees here have largely remained consistent or have decreased slightly. So it's either the same or it has come down slightly. For example, 1991-92 around 8.45 lakh, 7.85, 7.75 again up by some margin 8.27, and 23-24 7.64 lakh. So it's largely remained consistent, or rather, in fact, it has declined. Look at the private sector on the other hand, how the private sector has responded. Only 63,000 employees in the private sector bank 1991-92, and that number now has gone way beyond the government banks. Now there is a gap of around 1.3 lakh employees, 1.3 lakh employees more towards the private bank sector as compared to public sector. So as you can see here, a sector as important as banking has now seen private sector participation increasing considerably. Gone are the days when the government jobs or the government was the largest provider of employment. The government is still a pretty significant provider of employment, there's no doubt about that. Even today, lakhs of jobs are offered by the Indian government. However, the private sector has upped its participation quite significantly, at least in the banking structure. Now look at these IT companies. The IT companies, we are talking about the big 5 IT companies in India, is TCS, Infosys, etc. Look at their employment. Their employment also, in most of the cases, have increased from 2020. But the interesting part is, look at this, 2022 to 2024. It has either remained stagnant or it has decreased in most cases. Look, TCS, it has come down. Infi, it has come down. Wipro, it has again come down. HCL, almost the same. Tech Mahindra, it has come down. So see this very interesting trend. From 2022 to 2024, the huge employers that the IT companies are, they're actually reducing their workforce. That is the biggest indicator of the impact of technology such as AI. As more and more AI comes in the picture, this is where the need for having physical presence, the need for having employees do that job is reducing. And that is a dangerous sign for the youth, because they then have to make sure that they compensate this by earning higher level skills. Then come here, this is the railways and other public sector enterprises, central public sector enterprises. Now look at the blue thing, the blue graph or the blue bar that shows you the employment in railways. Now that is also consistently declining. See, 6.52 or 16.52, 15.45, 13, 12, 11. It has increased here slightly, but in the past few years in railways, there has been a declining trend. The employment in railways, and not just railways. Look at the government, other government companies, 22 lakh, 17 lakh, 14, 8.5, 8.4, 8.1. What do you see here? You see on the one hand, the government of India trying to offload the employees, and this is the data that proves it. The government trying to offload the employees, not just from the railways, but from the banks and from the other central public sector enterprises. On the other hand, you would expect that these employees that are being offloaded will shift towards the private sector. Is it happening? Not entirely. In banks, yes, it is happening, But in, let's say, IT companies, the biggest employers in India by far, that is not a trend that we are seeing. The number of workforce is reducing. You would expect as more and more people enter the workforce, the number of people who are employed here would increase, but that is declining. So there is this big problem of jobless growth. Again, it doesn't mean that we are not growing. India is growing. The GDP numbers certainly prove that. But the problem is the growth is not in proportion to the increasing employment opportunities. Look at the sectors, how the people have chosen their agriculture, or how they have chosen their employment rather. 1972-73, 74.3% of Indian workforce was in agriculture. Almost 3 out of every 4 people in India who were employed were working in agriculture only. Now that number has come down to 44.6, it's around 45%. Even now we have too many people in agriculture. And when I say too many people, the comparison that we usually make is, if a sector has 45% of India's workforce, how much is it contributing to our GDP? If, let's say, agriculture was contributing hypothetically 40+% in GDP, then there would not have been a problem with that. Then everyone would have been happy that, okay, we have a lot of agriculture output, we are exporting a lot of stuff, earning a lot of foreign exchange, but that is not a reality. The problem is 45% people of Indian workforce are only contributing 17% of India's GDP. That is a big problem. This is an issue. Now, with agriculture specifically, we have a lot of issues because of which the productivity is not that high. It's very unique kind of a problem. I'll just give you one example. The one big problem that India has with agriculture and low agriculture productivity is because of small land holding size. Means the average amount of land that a farmer owns. Now, imagine this problem. I'll tell you what the problem is in India. Let us imagine that there is a farmer in India that owns 10 acres of land. Okay? In rural India, especially earlier, the employment rate was high. Let's imagine this farmer has 4 or 5 children, let's say. Now, if he has 5 children, because of lack of skill, lack of employment or lack of education, these 5 children don't have any other job, so they think that we will also continue farming only. If they think we'll continue farming, the father has to then divide the land in these 5 children, right? Now, in the next generation, every child only owns 2 acres of land. So, land holding size has reduced drastically. Once again, these people will have 2 or 3 children, 2, 3, even 4 children. And if all of them decide to stay in agriculture, imagine the land holding size then. Within 2 generations, this 10-acre land of one person becomes less than 1 acre. And the lower the size of your land, the lower is your productivity. That is a big problem that we have. In case of China, for example, because they followed one-child policy for such a long time, with passing generation, the land does not get divided into so many numbers. That is a big problem that we have of land holding not being good enough. In India, over 85% of our farmers are in the category of small and marginal farmers only. Do you know that? When I say marginal farmer means whose land holding is less than 1 hectare. These farmers are called as marginal. Small farmers means those whose land holding is less than 2 hectares. Most of the government schemes that we have, like PM Kisan Yojana, etc., are targeted towards small and marginal farmers only. These small and marginal farmers do not have a lot of money, do not have a lot of resources. Their land holding size is small, because of which productivity is very low. So despite having so many people working in agriculture, its contribution to our GDP is just not parallel to that. It's just not comparable. There are many other problems with agriculture. I'm just showing you one aspect of it. Second part of our GDP, of our economy, is made up of the secondary sector, mainly the industrial sector. One big mistake that many people commit is they think that industry sector just means manufacturing. That is not true. Industry sector includes manufacturing mainly, but it includes other things as well. Let's say refinery, etc. All of that is a component of what you call a secondary sector industry. Now, in the secondary sector, again, the employment has changed. It has increased because it has decreased in agriculture, so it has to be absorbed in other sectors. So it used to be about 11% in 1972. It has gone up to 24.4% now. Now, this sector, I would say, kind of compensates. It's almost a similar kind of contribution that they do to our GDP. But within this, for manufacturing especially, the government expects much more. As you know, the government of India has been pushing the manufacturing sector consistently with Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, the PLI initiative, that is the production linked incentive scheme. A lot of these things have been done by the government, which have not given the kind of results that the government had hoped for. So while many more people have shifted towards this secondary sector, the government's expectation of its contribution to the GDP and how much would it improve or how much push it would have has not increased. China, for example, remains way ahead of India. I'll just give you a stat here to make you understand. Out of all the goods that are exported in the world, let's say the world export total is 100 rupees. Out of that, less than 3 rupees is from India. So Indian goods export does not even account for 3% of the global export. Compare this with China. Out of every 100 rupees of goods that are exported in the world, close to 25 rupees are from China. 1 in 4 of every value of the good comes in from China, which is exported in the world. That is the huge difference that we have. So in industry, manufacturing specifically has not been able to give us the kind of rewards, the kind of returns that we were hoping for. Many issues with that, but this is mainly the headline of it, where the government has not been able to make it as big as we wanted. Third is the crowning jewel of our GDP, the one that has been able to ensure that India remains a pretty strong country. India remains a very robust growing GDP, that is the services sector. It employs about 31% of our workforce now, and it contributes much more than that to our GDP. It contributes over half of India's GDP. Now, one common mistake that many people commit is assuming that services sector only means IT and computers. See, IT and computers is a part of it, but services sector is obviously much more than that. Anything that, let's say you pay money for something and you're not getting something physical in return, that is services. So let's assume you go to a bank and they open up your account, that is also service. Tourism, you spend money to travel, to go to other places, see those places, that is also service. You go to a hospital to get yourself treated, that is also service. All this is a part of services sector. Services sector is not just about banking or not just about IT services. IT in case of India plays a huge role in the services sector, there is no doubt about that, but services sector includes a lot more. And since it contributes humongously to our GDP, the government usually has been very protective of our services sector. The government has made sure that whenever we sign, for example, free trade agreements, services sector is usually kept out of it so that they don't have to face competition. Government does not want a situation where other companies from other nations come into our services sector and we don't put any taxes on them and they will take our business away. We do not want that to happen. So there has been an interesting policy of government towards the services sector as well. This is the data in table form from the NCERT specifically, how the employment status has changed in primary, secondary and in the services sector, as you can see here over the years. So the latest available data with the NCERT is of 2017-18, as you can see here, how they have contributed. Also the status of people who are self-employed, regular employed and casual wage workers, as we had discussed earlier as well. The one problem with NCERTs is that the data obviously will not be very up to date. These have been printed earlier, so when whatever data they had available till then, they would give you that data. But let's say if you're appearing in the exam in 2026 or 27 or even later, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense for you to quote the data up to 2018 only. So while NCERTs give you a lot of basic information, try and make you understand the issues, but it is your responsibility to use more updated data, especially in the mains exam, to make sure that your answer is better. Don't just restrict yourself to data availability till where the NCERT gives you the data. Try and have much more updated version of it. That will be extremely helpful for you. Now, if you look at our formal sector employment, specifically in India, how it has changed, what are some of the features of it. First, in the formal sector, we understand and government can get much more data as compared to informal sector. How? Because there are specific ministries and departments of the government that collect all that data. So Union Ministry of Labour, employment exchanges that are run by the government, they have data availability about how many people are employed. That is how the government comes up with the unemployment numbers. That is how periodic labor force survey can tell us how many people are unemployed in India. There has been significant impact of reforms of 1990s. One very significant reform is after 1991 reforms, since the government adopted a policy of liberalization and privatization, that meant that the government essentially made it easier for anyone to open up a business or open up a shop. There would not be any bunch of licenses that would be required. It would be much easier to follow regulations. So what it did was, it led to the further mushrooming of informal sector in India. So the employment in the formal sector kind of reduced as compared to informal sector because of these reforms. So while it did bring more employment opportunity, but a lot of them were in the informal sector. Majorly, again, private and the public sector, these are the two major sectors. And one of the other things that we have seen is, in terms of gender, obviously it is the males that dominate the workforce, as is the case in most of the countries. And it's not, interestingly, it's not just in the private sector, in the public sector also, males are the ones who are dominating. Now, there's a very interesting thing that you will see. Whenever you see a job post these days, and it's not just about the government, even if you see a job post from a private company or a private agency, in their job notification, they write a very interesting line in the end, which says, "We are an equal opportunity provider. We highly encourage the women also to apply." Now, they are not saying that we are reserving certain jobs for women, and they are not saying that we are giving preferential treatment to women, none of that. But they just say that we are an equal opportunity provider. Interestingly, even in the UPSC notification, you will notice this. They do write this specifically, that we are an equal opportunity provider. What they're trying to say is that we encourage the women candidates also to apply, and we promise we will not be differentiating or distinguishing amongst them just on the basis of their gender. We are not promising that you will be selected over everyone else, but we are encouraging that you should also apply, because we do see you also as an equal as compared to others. So in the private sector, public sector, both of these sectors, there is an increasing need to have more women employed. Now, these have been the major trends in the employment structure that has changed in India. First, the number of employees with Indian Railway, as we discussed, the number of employees with Indian Railways has decreased considerably. Indian Railways still remains a very heavy employer for the government. The employee cost is very high for the railways. There are close to 12 lakh people employed in Indian Railways even today. However, now understand this and understand this argument. In an ideal world, governments don't have a responsibility of giving jobs to the people. Please understand this. The responsibility of the government rather is to create an environment where the private sector is offering jobs to people. The government is not supposed to offer jobs. The government is supposed to run the country, make policies in such a manner that it becomes easier for you to get a job, that the private sector is encouraged to give you the job because they think that the business will be expanding. Think about it from the point of view of an industrialist. someone who runs an organization, someone who has a factory, if they think that their business is going to expand later on, they would obviously have a lot more reason to employ more people. They would employ more people, they will give them more jobs because their business is expanding. This is where we have to understand how the government plays a role in making policy. The government doesn't always have to give jobs to people directly. They have to create opportunities for the companies to feel empowered enough or optimistic enough to be able to give jobs. So reducing employment in Indian Railways is not a bad thing per se. If these people have now been absorbed in the private sector, it is a good thing for the government. Also, employees in the IT sector, as I told you earlier, IT companies in India, the big five, they employ a significant number of employees, but the short-term trend from 2022 to 2024 has shown a decline. So the very recent trend is slightly worrying because of upcoming technologies, AI, etc. That's slightly worrying time. It's also worrying in the long term for India because these IT companies contribute immensely to our GDP. A lot of their employees are working outside India, which you call as on-site projects, and they send back money to India, that is remittances. So a lot of remittances that India is getting from outside is because of these IT companies and the people that they have employed. So that also works in their favor. So government has to see this as a worrying sign. If these companies are employing lesser number of people, that means there is a big problem because for a long time they were a significant employer. Then the banking sector transformation, as we discussed in the banking sector, now private sector has many more employees in the government banks or the government sector, which is an interesting change. The government anyways is consolidating a lot of public sector banks. We now have 12 public sector banks remaining. The government earlier used to nationalize them. If you remember, nationalization of banks happened in 1969, then 1980. After that, the government has been consolidating banks. Means adding the smaller banks into or basically making them a part of the larger bank so that there is consolidation. Because of which again some people have lost their jobs, and this is where a very interesting trend has emerged in the last few years. In the mains examination, you should be aware of these trends. Again, trends in the long term and trends in the short term. Long term trend means, for example, what has happened since independence or what has happened since 1970s. Short term trend means what has happened in the past 3-4 years. So you should be aware about both of them. Now, one interesting factor, one interesting characteristic of India's economy is the informalization of Indian workforce. And when I say informalization, what it simply means is a huge majority of people actually work in the informal sector. Now, please understand, and we discussed this earlier as well, informal does not mean illegal. We studied this in the very beginning of the chapter. Informal does not mean illegal. Informal has certain features which are not found in the formal sector. Lack of written contracts, lack of proper rules and regulations, maybe more flexibility, but that is how informal sector is. We had discussed about this in the beginning as well. Apart from the fact that you do not have written contracts, etc., there are certain other features as well. For example, let's say you open up a company and you have all the paperwork, you're running as per all the licenses, but you employ less than 10 people. So if the number of people are less than 10, then you will be called an unorganized sector. You will be called an unorganized sector means in that case, it is not compulsory for the company to deduct your PF. The number of regulations that the company has to abide by are much lesser. Also, it includes agricultural laborers, small traders, street vendors, etc. They usually have lower wages, poor working conditions, no social security benefits. If you remember, we had discussed about how formal sector provides insurance, maternity leave, weekly offs, yearly some casual leaves, etc. None of that is found in the informal sector. There's lack of organization, and again, it doesn't just harm the employee, it may harm the employer as well, because just like the employer can ask the employee to leave the job and don't come from tomorrow, the same can happen the other way around. The employee can also announce that I will not come from tomorrow, and there's nothing much that can be done by the employer. That is how the informal sector usually works. Now, again, informal sector, the government ideally would want to reduce that because it does not give any social security benefits. It has dangers of pushing people into poverty once again. It is very difficult for the government to get exact data about informal sector because there are lack of contracts, because the tax deduction etc. is not up to the mark, social security benefits are not provided. It's difficult for the government to keep a track of all of that. And this is why the government also in an ideal situation would want a suppression of the informal sector and pushing them towards a formal sector. That is why whenever the government comes up with the GDP numbers in India, there's always a kind of a unsaid rule that these numbers will always be underreported in India because there will be so many people in the informal sector whose numbers have not come in. You would have seen that in the news that roadside vendors are being sent tax notices because some of them are earning lakhs of rupees and not paying any taxes. Now, how does the government know they are earning lakhs of rupees? Because they are accepting payment via UPI and the money is all going into their banks now, which was not the case earlier. And now government knows that this is the money that they're earning and they're not paying any taxes. Because earlier, even today, the government does not really foresee, ideally everyone has to pay tax. If you're earning above a certain level, you have to pay tax. But the government did not really force these street side vendors or daily wage workers to pay taxes. But now that the government has clue about, okay, they're earning this much because the money is coming in their bank account, the government is asking them for money. And this is one of the problems with the government trying to push people into formal sector, because an employee would think that as long as I'm in the informal sector, I don't have to pay a tax. Why do I have to transition into formal sector? But again, that's a larger debate. So formal sector, again, those entities having more than 10 employees, they give social security benefits, they have fixed salary, incentive, etc. There's a structure that is attached to how much you're earning. Informal sector does not really have much contracts anyways. Because of lack of contract, there's always a lot of exploitation. There are no fixed working hours. You can be asked to work for much longer hours. You can be forced to leave job instantly. A lot of these things can happen from time to time. Because of all these problems, we have a situation where informal sector might not be very well suited for the economy. Now, this is the number that usually shocks a lot of people. This is the makeup of India's economy. Just imagine, 94% of India's workforce is in the informal sector. 94%, such a humongous number. Only 6% of India's workforce is in the formal sector. This is why whenever we talk about taxes, the government always has this problem that India has a very narrow tax base. This is why we have such a narrow tax base. When 94% of your people are working in the informal sector, most of which you assume are not paying taxes, how can you expect to have a wider tax base? So the government's push for people to be brought into formal sector is also because of the government's need to have more taxes, assimilate them into a more formal structure. That is what the government is hoping to do. Now, why is it that we have such huge informal sector in India? As I told you, 1991 reforms had a major role to play. Because before 1991 reforms, even when you had to open up a very small settlement, a very small establishment, there were a bunch of licenses, permissions that you needed to get. Since the government has reduced that requirement, the government has moved on that path of liberalization, it has given a push to the informal sector. It has allowed people to open up their businesses, their establishments without going through much of the paperwork. Then, lack of formal employment opportunities means there are not enough jobs available in the formal sector anyways. So a lot of people who might be looking for a job in the formal sector, and since they are not getting one, it is that reason which is pushing them towards the informal sector. So lack of employment opportunity in the formal sector is a big reason. Then there's also a problem of migration and urbanization. Means, as a lot more people are moving from one place to the other, a lot more people are moving into the cities because agriculture is not working for them. Lack of skills does not make them eligible for a lot of formal jobs. The companies also, by the way, on their part, a lot of the companies do not want to bring people on board as a formal employee. Even the big companies that are in the formal sector have a lot of contractual labor who are paid only for the days that they come to work. Because for the companies also, imagine this, see, when you say that in the formal sector, they are given social security benefits or maternity leave, etc. It is a burden on the government, or it is a burden rather on the company. The government doesn't give the company any money. If the company is offering you health insurance, it is because the company is paying on your behalf. If the company is, let's say, offering you maternity benefit, it is the company that is bearing the cost and not the government. So in a lot of cases, the companies themselves would not want to have a lot of formal labor. Then inadequate educational skills. Again, it's easy to say get a job in the formal sector, but for that you require adequate skills, education to be eligible for that, for the companies to actually hire you. Then there are big regulatory challenges. As I said earlier, having a formal establishment, setting up a company that requires bunch of licenses, bunch of permissions, it's not easy for everyone. It requires money, it requires a lot of time as well. So you rather decide to open up something in the informal sector so that you don't have to wait such a long time. Because of all of this, we have a situation where informal sector unfortunately has become a lot more attractive, a lot more easier, a lot more convenient for both the employee and the employer in many cases, leading to swelling up of the informal sector in India. Because of which, this is the impact. First and the biggest impact by far is the job insecurity. Since you don't have a contract, you're not bound by any regulation, you will never be sure if you will keep your job tomorrow or not. There is no notice period in the informal sector. Even if, let's say, you are working and you do something that the boss does not like, just because the boss does not like you, he will tell you not to come from tomorrow. As simple as that. It's a one-person establishment in most cases. It also is a problem because it leads to gender disparities. Because see, informal sector also means that in a lot of the cases you are not treated well at job. It's a one-person establishment. The owner decides whether they are happy with you or not. And it can lead to exploitation in a lot of cases depending upon your gender. Then there is income inequality. You obviously do not get paid as much as you might get paid in the formal sector. And as we discussed earlier as well, in the formal sector, let's say when you switch your job and when you go to a new job, you can ask and demand a raise on the basis of what you were paid earlier. You can say that, okay, I was paid this much earlier, I demand a 20% increment or 30 or whatever increment that you want. In the informal sector, it is almost impossible to demand that raise. In the informal sector, you do not get that push because there is not much proof anyways of how much you are earning, of what you are worth, and that becomes a problem. There is almost zero social security benefits, insurance, maternity leave, etc. They don't exist, not even that. Even something as small as a weekly off, some paid leaves in a year, offs on a festival, for example, none of that exists. You will only be paid specifically for the days that you come in for the job. It also brings economic vulnerability. Again, the same thing. When you're not sure how long will you keep your job, when you're not sure if your boss is happy with you, if your boss would want you to come to the job tomorrow or not, it always brings that feeling that I'm economically vulnerable. I don't know if I will be able to keep the job. Should I buy something or not? Because if I spend my money today, I will not be able to manage it tomorrow. And it's bad for the entire economy. Please understand that. The worst thing for any economy is people not spending money. Understand this argument. If people don't spend money, that is the worst thing for an economy, because when you're not spending any money, because you are not sure if you will keep the job tomorrow or not. If you are 100% sure that your job is safe and you will get the next salary as you all expect, then you will be confident enough and you will spend money. When you are not confident enough of keeping your job, that is when you stop spending money, and that basically comes or brings the economy to a standstill. That is when you have a situation wherein the economy doesn't have any economic activity, because when you're not spending anything, the result is the companies, whatever stuff they have made, it is not being sold in the market. The workers are not being employed, so they are not getting a salary, so it all gets stagnated. So the worst thing for any economy is people not spending money, and that only happens when there is pessimism in the minds of the people, when they don't know if they will keep the job, and that does happen in the informal sector. So the for the bigger benefit of the economy, it is important that government creates an optimistic situation where people believe that yes, they do get a job, or their job will be safe. Now, the government has done its bit. It's not that the government is just leaving this to the God. The government is trying to make sure that we push people towards formal sector. For the gig economy we discussed earlier, there are certain governments, Rajasthan government introduced an act. The government is thinking about giving some social security benefit like insurance, etc. to the gig economy workers. We also have the e-Shram portal, under which informal workers can go and register themselves. Because the problem with informal workers is the government doesn't know how many workers there are in which company, because there's no data being given from the side of the company. So if the government tomorrow thinks or decides to launch a scheme for informal sector workers, they don't even know how many there are. So they first have to register themselves. Similarly, there are other schemes as well to provide benefit to informal sector workers, to push them towards more formal sector opportunities. But again, it's a long-term process. You can't expect that to happen overnight. Because the problem with the informal sector is that the number keeps on varying. The person might be out of the job, they might join the formal sector, they might again come back. So it's difficult for the government to keep a track. And essentially, if you are providing, let's say, pension to them, or if you are providing insurance to them, the ideal situation is that the employer should provide these, because when the government says I will provide insurance to informal sector, indirectly you are taking money from the taxpayers. See, government doesn't have its own money. Government runs on the money of the taxpayers. So if my money, that is a taxpayer's money, is being used to give pension, is being used to give social security benefits to the informal sector employees, my question will be, why is their employer not giving them these benefits? Why should I bear the cost? Are you able to understand this? Zomato, for example, or Swiggy, for example, tells the government that please give insurance to our delivery boys. Government says okay, but when the government is giving them insurance, they're actually taking money from my pocket. That is the taxpayer's money. My question is, why is Zomato and Swiggy not doing it? If they are doing their job, if they are bringing profit to these companies, why are they not paying for the insurance, and why is the taxpayer supposed to pay for that? That is a big part of the debate of what the government is trying to do. Now, the other side of the employment, so far we are talking about different types of employment, formal, informal, etc. The other side of the story is unemployment. A very bad term. You should not wish this on anyone. But India, as I said, every society, every economy has a natural rate of unemployment. An average rate that actually persists, wherein you would have a situation where on an average this kind of unemployment remains 3 to 4%, 3 to 3.5% is the case with India. Unemployment in simple terms is a situation where you are looking to find a job but you're not getting a job that is suitable for your skill set, that is suitable for what your aspirations are. That is a situation of unemployment. Now, there are different types of unemployments depending on the reasons that you're not getting a job, depending on certain other factors, and this is an important part. This has been asked multiple times by UPSC as well. We'll discuss what these types of employments are and how many of these do we usually see in India in different sectors. Starting with the first one, that is open unemployment. Open employment is a simple situation where you see people trying to get a job and they're not getting a job. Let's say they go to an interview and the interview did not get good enough, was not good enough. Or let's say people who are appearing for the UPSC examination or other examinations, not being able to crack that. So you're out of job only, right? That will be open unemployment. Majorly in urban areas, it's also mainly because the number of jobs available may not be as high, and there are other number of other factors involved, and more people are basically applying for it. The other unemployment that is seen in India in large numbers, especially in the rural area, is called disguised unemployment. Now, disguised unemployment is a very simple situation wherein the number of people who are employed, in a certain sector are much more than what is required. It usually happens in agriculture. Let's imagine the situation where in an agricultural field, for example, there are 30 people required to do a job, to work on the field. Okay. However, because of lack of other opportunities and there are family members, they said, okay, I'll also come. So instead of 30, 50 people are working on the job. They are not adding anything new. So the amount of work that the 30 were doing, the same work is being done here as well by 50 people. So they are not adding any productivity. If you remove these 20 extra people, the same work will be done at the same speed without any difference. So these 20 people will be considered as disguised unemployment. Disguised unemployment means on a paper it might give them an impression that no, I'm working, I'm an employed person, but in reality they are not adding any productivity. So they are actually disguised and they think that they're employed. That's a situation of disguised unemployment. As I said earlier, it happens in India because of the problem of small land holding size. I gave you an example of how with every generation the land holding size shrinks and we have lesser and lesser people because the land just keeps on getting divided with every generation. Because in the next generation you don't have enough opportunities to work somewhere else, you don't have enough jobs, so you stick to agriculture only, and by sticking to agriculture you actually end up having much smaller land holding size. And it has been proven that smaller the land holding size, lesser will be your productivity. The reason is simple. If you have a smaller land holding size, you will buy, let's say, smaller amount of seed, smaller amount of fertilizer. Now imagine a situation when you go to a market and you are buying 1 kg of rice or 1 kg of apple or whatever. The rate that is offered to you will be higher as compared to if you tell the shopkeeper, I am here to buy 100 kg of rice. Then they'll offer you a wholesale rate, right? Everything will become cheaper for you with the scale. You will be using tools or machinery like tractor. On a very small piece of land, you will not be using tractors and all. On a big piece of land, you will be using tractors, so productivity will increase. China also used to have this problem earlier of small land holding size. They started something called cooperative farming, where farmers were forced to club their land together and work together as a team, divide the functions, and then divide whatever profit they have. In India, we have not seen that being successful. Some states did try to start cooperative farming, West Bengal, Kerala being two of them. Interestingly, the two states which after independence had communist governments. These states did try to have cooperative farming with certain success, but in most other states, we do not have cooperative farming. So small and marginal farmers that make up over 85% of India's farmers, they are still struggling with the small piece of land, with low productivity and the problem of disguised unemployment just increasing. Third, we have something called seasonal unemployment. It's simple, as the name suggests, when people are employed during a certain part of the year, during a certain season. It's very simple. Let's imagine this. Let's say you are someone who sells AC or who repairs air conditioners, if your entire job is working air conditioners or let's say making any repairs in the air conditioners, you will only be employed in the summers, right? You will not be employed in the winters. There are many such occupations. Agriculture is also one of them. Construction workers, even tourism. For example, when it is peak summers, in most of the let's say outdoor tourist destinations, the number of tourists coming in will reduce. And when it reduces, obviously the people related to tourism will have their occupation affected. So this is the idea of seasonal unemployment, where it doesn't really depend on you. It depends on the season. In some seasons you will be occupied or you will have some employment, in some other season you will not. Then there is a issue of structural unemployment. Now this is a problem where your skill set that you have does not match the requirement of the company. This is a big problem that now the world will face with emergence of new technology. We discussed about the emergence of AI, for example, artificial intelligence. I told you earlier as well how due to the emergence of AI, we already are starting to see job cuts. We are starting to see many companies, even IT companies for example, preferring to have machines and AI do their job. I gave you an example of dark factories in China, remember? So the people who would earlier be employed in those factories and doing manual labor are not needed anymore, because the skills that they have are not the skills that are required. And this is where, if you have to be in demand or if you have to be relevant, it is expected that you keep on updating your skills. You keep on updating your skills with reference to what is required in the industry, with reference to what is the demand in the occupation where you are in, or the employment demand that it has. So this is where structural unemployment comes in. That is a mismatch of skills, mismatch between the skills that you have and the skills that are required by the company or the organization. Then there's something called cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is because of fluctuations in the economy. For example, there may be a global recession where you have no role to play. Let's say what happened during COVID. So many people lost their jobs during COVID-19, which doesn't have anything to do with their skill. It did not have anything to do with the change in employment. It did not have anything to do with they could control. It all had to do with what was happening beyond them and what was happening in the world economics. Similarly, 2008 recession, the housing market crisis that started with the US, that led to recession around the entire world. It again led to thousands and lakhs of people losing their jobs without any fault of theirs. These factors again were beyond their control, beyond the control of anyone, but the people lost their lives or lost their employment. This is where cyclical unemployment comes. And now this can be controlled by government policies to a certain extent. For example, if you look at the 2008 recession, while the entire world was affected by it, India did not get so affected by it. Yes, there were job losses in India as well, mainly in those companies which were foreign companies which had their headquarters in US, and those were mainly affected. But within the domestic market, within the domestic companies, we did not see so many job losses because of our economic policies at play there. So in this kind of unemployment, the government has to play a very important role. Then there's something called frictional unemployment, which is temporary. It's a situation where you are either let go from the job or you leave the job to take a break for a few months and then you get into a new job. So short-term unemployment in between two jobs for 2 months, 3 months, for a few weeks, that is frictional unemployment. It can also be a situation where, let's say there's a lady who is pregnant and she decides to leave the workforce for a bit for the pregnancy, and after a few years decides to join back. That is called frictional unemployment. She was unemployed not because of lack of skills, not because of economic cycle, not because of recession, but because of a decision that she took. So it's a short-term employment that is usually seen. So these are the different types of unemployment that we have in India. And again, all these are important. They have been asked in the UPSC exam in the past. The unemployment data that we have in India comes in from various sources. And we are talking about the government sources for now. It is from the census also, the one document that is published by the government once in every 10 years. 2021 census has been delayed considerably, but usually once in 10 years in census also we have this data. But the problem is it's a very long-term data. Census is conducted once in 10 years, so you have to wait for a much longer time for this data to come in. A more updated data comes in from NSO that provides annual labor market data. This data is compiled from the periodic labor force survey. And then we also have employment exchanges where people can register themselves for job opportunities. So people who are unemployed, how many people are not being able to get their jobs, how many people are asked to let go, all of these. This data is compiled by employment exchanges. So all of these are different data sources, again from the government itself. Private sector data we are not talking about right now. I just showed you earlier in the private sector also, there are certain organizations. There is a well-known organization called CMIE, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. They also give a lot of unemployment data. The government likes it or doesn't like it depending upon what data they have given. When they say employment is too high, government discards that data. When they say data is low or the number is low, then the government likes it. There are many other ways in which the government can find out how many people have been asked to let go. For example, in the formal sector, as long as you are working, your PF, Provident Fund, will get deducted from your salary by the company and it will be submitted to the EPFO. So let's say this month, 50 crore people or 5 crore people, their money from the salary came into PF. Next month, if 10 lakh lesser people had their PF deducted, that means there was a job loss of 10 lakh people. That is how the government also takes in data from the formal sector. There are various ways in which they collect the data. PF is one of that, but again, it is helpful only for the formal sector. For the informal sector, as I said, it's very difficult for the government to get up-to-date data. Apart from that, these are the issues that lead to unemployment we discussed earlier as well. Lack of skills, introduction of new technology. Also, rapid population growth is something that we did not discuss. The one problem very unique to India is that how do you give so many job opportunities to so many people? With population still increasing, although it's increasing at a much lower pace now, but it's still increasing. And to deploy and absorb all these people into the job market is extremely difficult. That is why the solutions that might have worked in other nations cannot really be copy-pasted into India, because the problems that India has are very unique to itself. There are also issues of regional disparities. Unemployment is not the same throughout the country. Let's say someone sitting in Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or Bihar might not have so many employment opportunities as compared to, let's say, someone in Tamil Nadu. Someone in Karnataka might have more employment opportunities. So there is a huge regional disparity also at play here, depending upon which there are different chances of you finding a job or not finding a job. Inadequate skill development, industrial growth also is a big problem. Many states have focused on industrial growth. Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Maharashtra, specifically these three states have focused a lot on industrial growth for many decades. Better industrial growth means more factories, more opportunities for jobs, more people employed and lesser unemployment rate. On the other hand, the states which have not focused on building this kind of infrastructure are now struggling to provide enough job opportunities to the residents in that state. And that is where the regional disparity begins. And it cannot happen overnight. These things require many decades. For example, if you have read in the news just a few weeks back rather, Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu, he offered a huge piece of land to TCS at 99 paisa, virtually free. Huge piece of land was given to TCS. Now you might ask, why are they giving it for free? Because they want TCS to come in, build their entire headquarters here, because it will bring in many more job opportunities to people. That is the kind of policy that you require if you want to tackle this issue of unemployment. But unfortunately, not every state has these kind of policies. Then we also have the problem of technological advances. As I said, as more and more skills come in, you have to be up to date with all of them. Otherwise, you risk losing your relevance, you risk losing your job, and that is a big problem that we are facing. We have a lot of people who are not skilled enough or who do not have enough skills to actually be able to work and get employed in these kind of companies, which is the problem India has. Unemployment brings itself a lot of negative impacts. As you can expect, poverty. With poverty, it is also leading to crime. Imagine a situation where you are out of job for a long time. You still have a family to feed. You still have people who are waiting for you to earn. You still have your own expenses. So you can't sit at home. So what do? This is what pushes people towards crime in many cases, unfortunately. There is a problem of declining welfare, declining standard of living. A lot of people, and again, I'm not saying that government schools are bad, but you will see a lot of people when they are out of job for a long term, one hard decision that they take is bring their kid out of the private school and admit them to a government school, which is free of cost, to save money. And we all know for a fact that unfortunately the standard of education in the government schools in most cases is not up to the mark, and that becomes a big problem. So lack of welfare, and that sends off a circle that you are then reducing the chances for the next generation also to get a good job. Social unrest, as I said, increasing crime rate, because if you are not being able to fulfill the most basic necessities for yourself and the family, you don't have a job, there is something that you have to do, and there is the only alternative that remains here is to enter the field of crime. Informal sector also gets a boost, because if you are not getting a job and you are not getting something permanent, you are ready to do anything, even on a per day basis, even on the basis of a few hours. Your argument will be, I'll just get a job no matter what, just give me a job. And this is what gives a lot of boost to the informal sector. All these are problems which are closely associated with the rise of unemployment. Now, having said that, there is something the government has to do, and something the government has been doing. So government has, again, one option for the government is to give jobs itself. But as I said in the beginning, this is not an ideal option, because there is no end to it. You cannot expect the government to keep on giving jobs after jobs after job, because that is something which increases the burden on the government, does not essentially increase the productivity of the government, and it also reduces competition. It also reduces the spirit of learning more and then getting a better job. As I said, in the ideal situation is that the government should create such an environment where the private sector is encouraged to give more jobs, rather than having an environment where the government has to come and give jobs to the people. That is not an ideal situation. Having said that, the government has started certain initiatives on both sides. So let me first give you some examples of direct employment generation, where the government itself has gone ahead and given jobs to the people. The first, public sector employment. For example, as I said earlier, railways, then let's say government's own schools, government's own hospitals, police, defense, all of that is directly being run by the government. And we all know there is a lot of craze in India about a government job for many reasons. The safety it gives, the security of tenure it gives, the perception that it will be safer, the perception that you might not be harassed with targets and all. That is one way in which the government gives job. Now, the interesting part is, and we did see this with railways, for example, that the number of people employed in railways has been declining. Now, that does not mean the government is throwing people out of the job. Please remember, when I say that when we see that the railways employment is declining or the number of people employed by railways is declining, how it works is, as more and more people get retired, government does not hire their replacement. As simple as that. So after a certain age you will be retired, but if the government is not compensating for that by hiring exact number of people, it will always be reduced. So it's a conscious decision by the government. These things don't happen by chance. It's a conscious design by the government to reduce the employment or the employee load that they have. Second thing that the government does, public work programs. For example, Government of India takes a lot of pride in saying that we are doing a lot of capital expenditure, which is in short called as CAPEX. The government, for example, very proudly says that our CAPEX has been increasing year on year. CAPEX or capital expenditure means expenditure done by the government on building assets, roads, bridges, highways, airports, schools, dams, all this physical infrastructure that will last for many years. That is what capital expenditure is. Now, if the government, for example, announces that we are building this huge expressway from Delhi to Mumbai or Delhi to Chennai, obviously it would require employment for a lot of people. So this brings in a lot of employment. This employs many people and cuts short the issue of unemployment. Third, the government also runs certain welfare schemes you might have heard of, where the government tries to again provide opportunities for the people, especially to the disadvantaged groups in some cases, like there is rural development program, training of the rural youth, etc. Government tries to provide them skills that are good enough for them to get jobs in the formal sector. Many, for example, Skill India program was being run by the government. Many people, for example, were being given skills such as tailoring, carpenter, medical assistant, someone who can work as a, let's say, ambulance driver, or someone as a helper in the ambulance, diagnostics. These things are skills that the government is trying to impart on the people under these kind of programs. Now, these were the direct opportunities or direct programs where the government is employing them directly by themselves. On the other hand, there are some other initiatives that come under the category of indirect employment generation, where the government is trying to create opportunities for people to be able to get employment. First, the private sector promotion. A lot of these things, for example, a big example of this can be the PLI scheme, Performance Linked Incentive Scheme. This scheme started with 3 sectors, now it covers 14 sectors. For example, mobile phone manufacturing. India now produces a much larger number of mobile phones than what we used to have earlier. Over 90% of mobile phones sold in India today are actually made in India. So what the government has done, they have chosen a few sectors and told the companies that if you are working in these sectors and you increase your production above a certain level, or an average, for example, a company used to produce 5 lakh mobiles in a month. They were told, if you go beyond 5 lakh, we'll give a part of this incentive to you in cash. So government has given a push to these companies to have more production. For more production, they would obviously require more people, leading to job creation. So lakhs of people have gotten jobs because of the PLI scheme. Again, the government is not employing them. The government is not saying that you are on our payrolls or you are our employee. No. The government just created this situation so that the private sector would require more employees to come in. So PLI scheme is one example. Development of industry, for example, you might have read about SEZ, Special Economic Zones, where again the government encourages the companies to bring investment in these zones. The government tells them we will take lesser taxes from you, or we will not take taxes for some time. Labor laws will be relaxed, don't worry, you can export more. These are examples of what the government does, especially government putting manufacturing units, government giving encouragement to IT sector, Prime Minister talking a lot about tourism, for example, time and time again, that tourism sector is important. You know, Prime Minister, for example, few months back had made the statement that influential people who go outside India to have their big celebrity wedding should actually have their wedding in India rather than going outside. A lot of these things are done by the government to generate employment, not directly by the government, but the government is creating this environment, conducive environment for private sector to give the job. Similarly, the skill development programs I was telling about, Skill India Mission, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, all these are initiatives under which millions and millions of people have already gotten employment, skills and then employment opportunities. Again, this does not add burden on the government. It creates an environment where more people can get skills and get employment not just in India but outside as well. For example, in a lot of countries, especially let's say in West Asia, Indian nurses, Indian medical professionals are in huge demand. A lot of nurses, for example, let's say from Kerala, actually go and work in Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc. This is where this actually is a program which can help India have more people ready for employment, not just in India but outside India as well, which helps India earn foreign exchange also in the long run. Not just this, the government has also been giving a push to self-employment. You would have heard Prime Minister saying this multiple times, that rather than being a job seeker, why don't you become a job provider? So government, for example, is pushing for entrepreneurship as well, making loans available to people, whoever wants to, let's say, take a loan under Stand Up India, Startup India scheme. There are Mudra Yojana loans available, 3 categories of loans which are easily available. The government is, many of the state governments also are giving encouragement to startups. A few months back, Telangana government started this initiative where if you want to start a new company, rather than taking permissions, etc. from the government, you just start your business and the government will assume that you have all the paperwork, all the permission required. The government will ask for them later, but you don't delay, you can start the business. The government is trying to give a push to entrepreneurs. The Prime Minister keeps talking about them again to create more opportunities and again to convert a job seeker into a job provider. Similarly, development of the MSME sector. MSME sector is again the backbone of employment in India. The MSME sector employs over 23 crore people in India. A majority of Indian workforce works in the MSME sector. MSME is micro, small, medium enterprise. So the government has tried to make sure that the availability of loans for them also improves. They had a hard time getting a loan. The banks would not offer them loan. They thought that no, these are not trustworthy or these are loans that might not come back. But the government has tried to create an environment which is much more suitable for them. There are initiatives such as the Udyam portal where they can register easily. Their licensing, etc. has become much easier. The government has given a push by offering interest subvention in certain cases, where the government says a part of your interest on certain loans, I will pay, you don't have to pay. All these things the government has been pushing for to develop the MSME sector even further. Apart from that, the government has run certain programs that has led to employment generation in large numbers. I'll give you some examples. These are government schemes. The most famous one is MGNREGA. Started in 2005, still going very strongly. This is a government scheme under which the government promises at least 100 days of unskilled manual labor in the rural areas. So at least 100 days of unskilled manual labor will be provided to you. That too within a certain radius of where you live. In case certain areas witness drought or other issues, the government increases the number of days in a year. In fact, this has been one of the largest social welfare schemes in the entire world. It has been running on for 2 decades now. It has led to building of infrastructure as well. It has led to poverty reduction and very importantly, not just poverty reduction, One other factor that many people ignore in MGNREGA is the law says at least 33% jobs under MGNREGA should be given to women only. 1/3 jobs have to be given to women only. But do you know how many jobs are given? Women are given over 50% of jobs under MGNREGA consistently. It changes year to year, but usually 53 to 54% jobs under MGNREGA are actually given to women. This is also a big success for this particular scheme of the government, where the government has been able to make sure that this not just leads to social welfare, it leads to employment generation, and because people are getting job in the rural areas, the migration that used to happen from rural to the urban areas, that has also declined considerably. That is also something which is working for the government, because the government also is aware of the fact that if many people move from rural to urban areas, it leads to creation of slums, it leads to creation of other problems in the cities, and it is ideal that these people get jobs in their villages only. This is where MGNREGA has been able to work very well. We also have Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Protsahan Yojana that encourages the employers to have new jobs by providing incentive to them. The government focuses on or gives incentive to those who are running companies, telling them that you should be or you would be able to get incentive from the government in case you are willing to offer more jobs, in case you are willing to have more employees as compared to what you usually have. All these, again, this is not the complete list. These are just a few examples of the government initiative. Then we also have the National Rural Livelihood Mission. Again, it's an old mission. It also empowers women's self-help groups. Self-help group again is a very, very important part of India's structure of how the society comes together, works together. These are mainly women-led groups where women come together, help each other with employment opportunities, help each other with new skill development initiatives. There is a very famous self-help group called the Kudumbashri. We talked about this earlier if you remember, where lakhs of women members have come in. These don't just give employment opportunities, they also provide skills to women, they also ensure that women have each other's support in times of need. All these are examples of what the government has been doing. Now, in self-help group, government also provides interest subvention. So if they are starting a new business initiative and they've taken a loan from the bank, let's say bank offers them a loan at 8%, government says, don't worry, 3% interest I will pay, you only pay remaining 5%. That is again to give a push to these self-help groups to employ more people and get more people some kind of a job. Then Startup India, Stand Up India scheme, as I told you earlier, helping the startups not just with funds, getting them in touch with the experts of their field, getting them in touch with mentors, creating more jobs, and it is also focusing on disadvantaged sections of the society. It focuses on giving better loans or easier loans to women, SC, ST entrepreneurs, because the idea is not just job creation. The idea is welfare of the society, especially keeping in mind the idea of affirmative action. Means helping those communities come at par with the others that have been discriminated against in the past, where they have not had the kind of opportunity that others have had to compete. This is what the government is trying to do. Again, this is not a complete list. There are so many other initiatives that you would have read in current affairs that you will keep on reading about. This particular chapter talked to us about the employment situation in India. And again, this is very dynamic. The data obviously keeps changing. The more updated data that you have, the better it is for you. The NCERTs don't give you up-to-date data, but they do give you a historical trend. And this was a historical trend that we discussed. Just to sum it up, India's employment situation is divided into formal and informal sectors. Informal sector contributes a humongous majority, about 94% of the employment in India is in the informal sector. The problem with that is lack of contract, lack of assurity, lack of job security, and the government is trying to push them into formal sector. There are different types of unemployments that we are facing. Structured employment, cyclical, disguised unemployment, then there is frictional unemployment, open unemployment. These are different types of unemployment, some which are controllable by the government, some which are not. The government in turn is looking to reduce the unemployment rate by offering a lot of different types of schemes, either giving employment to the people themselves or having the private sector come in and give employment by providing opportunities and creating situations which are conducive for giving that kind of employment opportunities. The government always is also pushing the banks to give easier loans. The government is making regulations easier as well. This is what we discussed in chapter number 6. Your time now to tune into chapter number 7. See what other parts of Indian economy are included there. Thank you so much. My name is Harshmeet Singh. I'll see you in the next chapter. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.